Good day to our viewers here at Bring the World Home. Bring the World Home is a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. Each week we give you insight and exposure into the volunteer world of the Peace Corps, which serves 132 countries around the world. Currently there's about 8,000 volunteers serving in those countries all over the world. Peace Corps is enjoying its 47th year of world service and has processed and utilized the volunteer time and efforts and energies and talents of over 190,000 volunteers in that 47 years. We have a little bit of a different program today. We have as our guest Mr. Phil Olson. Phil, welcome to Bring the World Home.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
So happy to have you join us today. Our focus today is going to be on not volunteering as a Peace Corps volunteer, but with you on the administrative aspects of the Peace Corps. You were a volunteer in the in the Philippines, 62 to 64. 62 to 64, right at the very beginning of Peace Corps, and then eventually matriculated, if you will, into becoming an administrator, first a volunteer leader in the Philippines, then into administration, regional, national, and so on. We'll like to get into that a little bit in just a moment. For our viewers, the Peace Corps has been a way for many volunteers, many people, many American citizens to find an identity or create a new view of themselves through volunteerism, and it's the opportunity to work out in the world. Mr. Olson has got a vast experience in that realm, and we'd like to explore some of that with him today and share with you, our viewers. Just to recap, you graduated with a degree in journalism, went into the Air Force, became a pilot. You were in the Air Force ultimately as a captain, is that correct?
Correct.
And then when Peace Corps came along, you got excited about the concept of the Peace Corps and Peace Corps service. And so instead of following your initial interest in journalism or staying with the Air Force, the lure of working the Peace Corps mission, if you will, took you to the Philippines. You served as several years there as a volunteer, which we've explored in another program with you in the past. If you could share with our audience what took you from being just a volunteer into the leadership role that eventually you achieved.
I was fortunate in being tapped by our country director, Dr. Lawrence Fuchs, to become a volunteer leader in Mindanao and Sulu, which was a vast area, 225 volunteers needing support, medical support, books, materials, content. And I agreed to become a volunteer leader for a portion of Mindanao and Sulu, extending down into the Sulu Sea and the China Sea, with very remote locations. And as a pilot, I had an opportunity to fly Filipino aircraft. I had a Filipino license, and I frequently borrowed, begged, and used my friends' airplanes to get around. I also
to service the volunteers.
Sure.
The Peace Corps volunteers all over Mindanao and Sulu.
Yeah.
For our viewers, we've had the opportunity to explore a lot of Peace Corps volunteers' service, the nature of their service, and we forget that the volunteers are not just out there by themselves. They're doing work often by themselves, working with host country nationals, but the other aspect is they have to be supported, and Peace Corps has an administrative role to fill in support of volunteers. And Phil, your work as a volunteer support administrator and volunteer leader, etc., was exactly that. what does an in-country Peace Corps administrator do to support volunteers? What's the kind of support that volunteers need? How do you meet their needs? What did you do exactly in your role as a leader and administrator?
Well, there are volunteers and there are volunteers. Some need a good deal of support, others need very, very little,
Okay.
depending upon the nature of their role and their own personalities and,
Sure.
and abilities. Many of the volunteers needed regular supplies of personal hygiene items. We all had medical kits that were given to us
Yes.
with limited amounts of medications and so on that had to be replaced from time to time. I traveled all of Mindanao and Sulu by jeep, by airplane, by light plane, by boat, and was constantly traveling to these 200 or more volunteer locations. And
Mindanao and Sulu is a large geographic
very,
area.
very large
You have
geographic area.
Over 200 people spread all
Oh,
around.
Yeah, a very large area, and much of it archipelago with fairly wide body of water between the islands. So it created a real problem for logistics, particularly because the Bureau of Public Schools, with which we were working in various projects, educational projects at all levels, elementary, secondary, higher education, teachers training, wanted certain materials dispersed through the volunteers, and through our system we could do it more efficiently and quicker than through the
Host country system.
host country system.
Okay.
Our bureaucracy was much more flexible and really not a bureaucracy at all. We were always inventive and feeling free to cut corners and do things the quick way and the easy way. And the host nationals, our counterparts, appreciated that kind of flexibility and came to count upon us to do certain things. As an administrator, I was continuing to do much of what I had done as a volunteer leader. I did what was done as a volunteer leader based upon my own experience as a volunteer. It was possible for me to get a ride in a privately owned airplane because I was a pilot, and a lot of the guys that I flew with were Filipinos who would like me to give them a little instrument training, and I was also an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
So it was mutually beneficial. Yep.
Well, you have a tremendous background for this type of work, which was absolutely necessary. The Peace Corps volunteers that you're supporting are not just in one field of work. There's teachers, there's public health workers, there's probably people in business.
We had fisheries, a small fisheries, very effective one in Zamboanga province, and we also had a fairly sizable maternal child health care project with the Department of Health.
So you, as an administrator and supporting Peace Corps, you had to be, you probably lived the term multitasking before it was coined.
Exactly.
The idea of being able to work and support, you know, a teacher in the morning and a fisheries person in the afternoon, and even more so is testament to your capability. You've given us a bit of idea of how this, of the needs. Do you, some volunteers in the past publicly have decried the lack of support that Peace Corps administration
Yep.
provides.
Yep.
In fact,
well,
they say, well, there was no support. Well, of course, we have to understand and we accept that everybody's experience is different, but you've worked in other bureaucracies, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Can you compare the Peace Corps bureaucracy with other bureaucracies? Is it more efficient, more productive? More,
no, I would say that...
is it a better culture? Or?
I would say that Peace Corps bureaucracy is very nebulous and sometimes non-existent. Where I enjoyed it so much was that it was pure fun and challenge to try to do things better than they had been done before me, and to be more responsive to those areas of the volunteer support programs that needed what I could provide. Some of the times it was ideas for a water seal toilet program, because I built one when I was a volunteer. And that was fun. That was just plain satisfying when I got water running and the first water seal toilet inside a house.
So do you, could we characterize the Peace Corps bureaucracy as a top-down bureaucracy or a bottom-up bureaucracy?
I'd say
a combination.
It's a combination. We had a country team that worked closely with the comparative heads of programs at the national level, and then through the provinces to the barrios where our volunteers were located. We tried to avoid the bureaucracy of USAID and State Department, and usually avoided it pretty well. But
you mean avoided interacting with it or avoided it as a model?
Avoided it as a model. We couldn't avoid interacting with it because we were part of the country team,
right.
As far as the ambassador was concerned and the USAID offices.
Could you give us a kind of a quick overview of let's say, the organizational, the diplomatic organization in a country, in the Philippines?
In the Philippines, it's gone from a colonial setup, which we had in the early part of the 20th century, to a partnership with a very strong reliance on public school system that was introduced to the Philippines by volunteers in the early 1900s. Volunteer teachers, American teachers. Many people in the Philippines saw Peace Corps as an evolution of that program, which was very interesting because the Bureau of Public Schools in the Philippines was a strong educational model and a very successful one, bringing literacy to a very high level throughout the country.
Yes. Peace Corps is organized under the Department of State, the State Department of the United States government. It's there as part of that institution and bureaucracy. And we take, the Peace Corps organization and administrators work under what office in the country? The ambassador's office?
That became a very touchy subject in the Philippines. We had an original director, Dr. Lawrence Fuchs from Brandeis University, who was our first director, and he decided to move the Peace Corps headquarters out of Manila, where the State Department is located, the capital of the country, to Zamboanga City, which is 650 miles away, and almost to the extreme opposite end of the Philippine archipelago. And there was a certain amount of disenchantment by the State Department, losing close and regular contact with the program that had heretofore been headquartered in Manila. Eventually, it evolved back into Manila, but while I was a volunteer leader, and a regional representative, our headquarters was first of all in Manila, then in Zamboanga City, where I was stationed, and then returned back to Manila again.
So this was a conscious effort to separate the
distance is what they were looking for.
They wanted the perception that Peace Corps was an independent function of the people of the United States, not a function of the government of the United States.
Not a function of the State Department.
Yeah.
And that was alternately a useful role and then later on became problematic with our own State Department.
And is this, again, now from your personal opinion, was this a common perception from people in a host country that the Peace Corps is really a political machine as opposed to a true altruistic institution or organization?
I think we enjoyed a marvelous period at the beginning of Peace Corps, 1962 to 66, when John F. Kennedy was president. His personality and his message was very, very popular with the Filipinos, and they were well informed and interested. Mm-hmm. That sustained our roles as volunteers and as a bureaucracy within the Philippines for a long, long time.
And probably throughout the world. I think that
I think
his
it
influence was
very useful.
Very popular. Just in your opinion, do you have an opinion that, or a perception of what it might be today?
Yeah, I think the Peace Corps, as I know it, and as I talk with friends who are in Micronesia, Philippines, and in Africa, is still very highly regarded as an American entity rather than a State Department or military or quasi-military presence. And I say that is very, very important to maintain. And I hope Peace Corps can continue to do so.
I think that's, I agree, that's a very important aspect. Turmoil around the world today gets publicity today. One of the things that we hear often from people who are embroiled in the turmoil is we love American people, we don't care too much for American politics.
Yep.
And I think that it is important to, and this is where the administration, the Peace Corps administrators must play a significant role in helping to maintain that view by host country nationals, by host countries, of that Peace Corps is a representative of the people of the United States and not the politics of the United States.
And vive la différence. I think the role becomes very difficult sometimes for Peace Corps administrators to walk a tightrope, particularly when.
Can you give us an example of that you've experienced in that realm? Or have knowledge of?
I was host to the ambassador, the American ambassador to the Philippines, a couple of times because he loved Zamboanga, where I was living, and he'd come down and go diving with me for shells and fish. And he would have come far more frequently, I think, but I said, we're attracting a great deal of attention here, and the village where I lived and where we had our training center, small barrio, also happened to be known to me as a frequent smuggling spot. Compass full of illegal cigarettes and other contraband arriving in the Philippines from Borneo at night. And it came to my attention that the reason we were immune from any kind of problems with the smugglers was because they appreciated the light that I had placed up on the porch of our building.
Became an aid to navigation.
It was an aid to navigation. And I knew that only late in the game, and I thought it was potentially embarrassing to the ambassador if he became involved.
Associated with the
Yeah.
underground economy. Huh? Well, that the idea of maintaining this separation of functions and purposes and missions, your support of volunteers, not only in the Philippines, but again, your perception of how it's done in other countries around the world. Can you give us any insight to the workings of Peace Corps on a national level here in the United States and so forth?
I had the opportunity, Chip, to become Philippine desk officer in Washington at Peace Corps headquarters, and I spent a year there with various duties involving recruiting, program design.
Describe or define what a desk officer is and does.
A desk officer, the role was filled before me by Jay Rockefeller, who subsequently became a senator and is a senior member of the Armed Services Committee now at the Senate level. He had established a role for the desk officer for the Philippines that is closely related to the desk officer at the State Department for each country. The desk officer is the person who answers the telephone in the middle of the night when there's an emergency or an accident. He or she is the one who is responsible for being aware of communications capabilities, the problems that are involved in access to individual volunteer locations, knowing the host country intimately, and hopefully having some linguistic experience and capability in the target languages.
Being able to get her done, so to speak, whatever, in either direction.
Whatever is needed.
If it needs to come from the United States to the host country, or from the host country to the United States, the desk officer needs to be able to
It was a very, very
manage.
challenging sort of role, and I think you'd like it, and I know I did. It was a lot of fun. And then I was asked to come to the University of Hawaii in Peace Corps training as a basis of that experience. The Philippines and other desk operations that I've seen throughout the world are pretty much modeled after the State Department desk role, which is information, communications, and response.
Appropriate response. And is there opportunity for a viewer to go into Peace Corps administration directly, do you believe?
Yes.
Do you know?
By all means.
Some of our people may not want to be a volunteer, but have an interest in serving the country and doing something that has intrinsic value for them.
There's a Peace Corps web page which is available for both staff positions and volunteer positions.
Okay. www.peacecorps.gov.
That's it. And by examining that, one of the things that those interested in an administrative job in Peace Corps or Peace Corps country role would be to ask for the application form, which is rather large and challenging, and go from there. The Peace Corps is expanding. The candidate for the Democratic presidency role has said that he favors doubling the size of Peace Corps, and if he becomes the president, I'm confident that he will follow through.
Some change
Yeah.
will occur. The and you've been a volunteer and you've been an administrator. Do you is there greater weight associated in terms of satisfaction with one
If
mission over another? Do
If
you
I
think?
were to go back in the Peace Corps in any role, it would be as a volunteer.
Why?
Because it is
There's
free.
not the I mean, there seems to be status associated with being an administrator.
Oh yeah, there is, and that's enjoyable too. But I've done that, and
Okay.
I really enjoyed the ability to innovate and work directly with people and get out into the remote areas as a volunteer, and that's still the most satisfying.
Still satisfying. Well, it's you bring the perspective of both sides to us, and that's why we wanted you to join us today. We appreciate the two perspectives that you've been able to share with us. What do you feel about continuing volunteer service at your age?
Oh, some of the best volunteers I ever knew in the Philippines and elsewhere were my age or almost my age, and very effective, freewheeling, and indomitable. I think that there's a great role for people my age.
In volunteers.
Yeah.
Phil, thank you very much for your time and energies with
thank
us
you.
today. Again, for our viewers, the volunteerism is some way, a way for a person to create and identify a identity for themselves by working in the world. We thank you for joining us in this episode of Bring the World Home, production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. Tune in again with us each week at this time on the Alelo Network, Channel 53. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.